In April 2025, Israel prepared a series of strikes against Iran's nuclear facilities designed to set back Tehran's nuclear ambitions by at least a year. Israeli military planners developed multiple options, combining airstrikes, commando raids, and a week-long bombing campaign, targeting Iran's most sensitive nuclear infrastructure. At the United States naval facility Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean, 6 American B-2 bombers took position, carrying 30,000-pound bunker-busting bombs capable of penetrating Iran's most deeply buried sites. 2 aircraft carriers maneuvered into strategic positions in nearby waters. American firepower stood ready across the region to support an operation that could shatter the uneasy peace of the Middle East. But in Washington's corridors of power, a dramatic battle of wills was unfolding that would decide the operation's fate. A daring plan. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has long positioned himself as the world's leading voice against the Iranian nuclear threat. According to the New York Times, throughout early 2025, Israeli military commanders had prepared a range of options that could, quote, set back Tehran's ability to develop a nuclear weapon by a year or more. The most ambitious of these plans combined airstrikes with commando raids on underground nuclear sites. The option would have mirrored a more complex version of an operation that Israel conducted in Syria in September 2024, when Israeli forces landed by helicopter to destroy a Hezbollah-linked underground missile facility. For such high-risk missions into Iran's most fortified locations, Israeli military leaders assessed they would need American air support to protect ground forces. However, this complex operation would require months of preparation. With time as a factor, Israeli planners shifted toward a more immediately executable option, an extended air campaign, potentially lasting more than a week, according to officials briefed on the plan. This modified strategy would have begun by neutralizing Iran's remaining air defense systems, following up on Israeli strikes in 2024 that had already destroyed much of Iran's Russian-made S-300 air defense network. Israeli intelligence believed the timing was strategically favorable. The Assad government in Syria had fallen, cutting off a key weapon smuggling route to Iran, while in Lebanon, Israeli military operations had significantly reduced the threat from Hezbollah. Unable to rely on support from key allies, Iran's position in the region was looking weaker than it had in a long time. What's more, the country's missile capabilities had been damaged in failed attacks against Israel in April 2024. As the plans developed, Netanyahu reportedly pressed for swift action. While military officials initially suggested October 2025 as a realistic timeframe, the Prime Minister wanted to move faster, leading to a May timeline for the air campaign option. The U.S. moves in. With White House approval, General Michael E. Kurilla, head of U.S. Central Command, orchestrated a substantial military buildup across the Middle East region. U.S. officials acknowledged to reporters that while the assets could be used for operations against the Iran-backed Houthis in Yemen, they could also potentially be used to support Israel in the event of armed conflict with Iran. The aircraft carrier USS Carl Vinson moved into the Arabian Sea, joining USS Harry S. Truman, already positioned in the Red Sea. The Pentagon deployed 2 Patriot missile batteries and a Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System, or THAAD, to the Middle East. Most significantly, it's believed that 6 B-2 bombers were dispatched to the Indian Ocean island base of Diego Garcia. These are the only aircraft in the U.S. arsenal capable of delivering the massive 30,000-pound GBU-57 bunker-busting bombs necessary to penetrate Iran's deeply buried nuclear facilities. The Pentagon had also begun exploring the deployment of additional fighter aircraft to the region, potentially to bases in Israel. As American assets took their positions, General Kurilla and National Security Advisor Mike Waltz began discussing exactly how they could be used to support Israeli actions. Even if American planes weren't to participate directly in the initial strikes, their presence would serve as a powerful deterrent against Iranian retaliation. This was a critical consideration, given that any Israeli attack would almost certainly provoke a major Iranian response, using their considerable arsenal of surface-to-surface missiles capable of striking Israeli territory, a scenario that had played out on a smaller scale in previous confrontations. Divisions emerge. In parallel with military preparations, a fierce debate unfolded within President Trump's inner circle. The administration had split into 2 opposing camps, with fundamentally different approaches to the Iranian nuclear threat. On one side stood the Hawks, led by Secretary of State Marco Rubio and National Security Advisor Mike Waltz. They pushed for military confrontation, arguing that Iran's currently weakened position presented an ideal opportunity to destroy its nuclear program through direct strikes or by supporting an Israeli assault. For those who believed Iran could not be trusted to negotiate in good faith, the military option held strong appeal. On the other side were those favoring diplomatic engagement, including Vice President J.D. Vance, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, and Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. According to reporting by the Times of Israel, these officials wanted to avoid putting American soldiers at risk and feared the economic consequences of skyrocketing oil prices that would likely follow an attack on Iran. The internal debate intensified during a critical meeting when Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard presented a concerning intelligence assessment. Gabbard warned that concentrating American military forces in the region increased the risk of a broader conflict with Iran. Her assessment suggested that a strike could easily escalate into a larger war, a view that gained traction within the administration. White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles joined those expressing skepticism about the wisdom of supporting a military strike. Even Waltz, who had previously argued that Iran was vulnerable, began questioning whether an Israeli strike could succeed without substantial American assistance. The debate took a major turn when Iran showed openness to diplomatic engagement. After initially appearing to reject a direct talks proposal Trump had sent on March 12th, an Iranian official responded on March 28th with a willingness to engage in indirect negotiations, a development which strengthened the hand of those advocating for diplomacy. According to administration sources, Vice President Vance argued that Trump had, quote, a unique opportunity to make a deal. It was also suggested that if negotiations failed, military options could still be pursued later. Trump's decision. On April 1st, General Kurilla headed to Israel with a message. The White House wanted to halt preparations for an attack. The following day, Netanyahu placed a call to Trump. According to Israeli sources, the U.S. president declined to discuss Iran policy over the phone, instead extending an invitation for the Israeli prime minister to visit Washington. Netanyahu arrived at the White House on April 7th. While the visit was publicly framed as an opportunity to discuss Trump's new tariff plan, the true priority for the Israeli delegation was the proposed strike on Iran. What happened next caught Netanyahu visibly off guard. With the Israeli prime minister seated beside him in the Oval Office, Trump announced the opening of direct negotiations with Iran regarding its nuclear program. One reporter present later recounted the moment when Trump made the unexpected announcement, describing how Netanyahu, quote, swallowed hard, then bowed his head. It was painfully evident that Israeli officials had not anticipated that Trump would make the negotiations public during such a high-profile meeting. In private discussions, Trump made his position clear to Netanyahu. He would not provide American support for an Israeli attack in May while diplomatic efforts were underway. The next day, Trump clarified his stance, telling reporters, quote, if a military solution is needed, that's what'll happen. Israel, of course, would lead it. Netanyahu, in a Hebrew video statement after the meeting, acknowledged the two paths forward, saying, quote, this can be done by agreement, but only if this agreement is Libyan style. They go in, blow up the installations, dismantle all the equipment, under American supervision. Referring to Iran, he then added, quote, the second possibility is that they drag out the talks, and then there's the military option. The White House meeting was characterized as tense by officials from both countries. One American official told Axios, quote, Trump and Netanyahu see things very differently on the issue of a military strike in Iran. The president kinda relished sticking it to him on Iran. The same dynamic you saw in public is what happened in private. Following Netanyahu's visit, Trump sent CIA Director John Ratcliffe to Israel. He met with Netanyahu and Mossad Chief David Barnea to discuss options, including covert operations and stricter sanction enforcement, signaling that while the immediate strike plans were off the table, other avenues remained under consideration. Further developments. Despite Trump's pivot to diplomacy, Israel has not entirely abandoned the military option. According to Times of Israel reporting from April 19th, Israeli officials are now considering a more limited strike on Iran's nuclear facilities that would require less U.S. support than originally planned. It remains unclear if or when Israel might move forward with this scaled-down operation. Meanwhile, the diplomatic track has gained momentum. U.S. and Iranian negotiators met in Rome on April 19th for a second round of preliminary nuclear talks, following initial discussions in Oman. International Atomic Energy Agency Chief Rafael Grossi visited Tehran on April 17th, emphasizing that cooperation with the IAEA is, quote, indispensable to provide credible assurances about the peaceful nature of Iran's nuclear program. However, tensions remain high. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi declared that Iran's uranium enrichment is non-negotiable, directly contradicting U.S. Mideast envoy Steve Witkoff's statement that any nuclear deal must eliminate Iran's enrichment and weaponization capabilities. Grossi warned that Iran is not far from obtaining nuclear weapons, highlighting the urgency of the situation. As Trump pursues his diplomatic initiative, his focus on the Middle East has shifted. His administration has announced an end to sanctions on Syria, negotiated the release of an American hostage from Hamas, and ceased bombing the Houthis in Yemen. These moves have left Israeli officials feeling sidelined. During Trump's visit to Saudi Arabia in May, while he met with Gulf leaders, warning sirens sounded across Israel as Houthi missiles targeted the country. The ultimate outcome remains uncertain. Trump insists his approach will benefit Israel, telling reporters, quote, "This is good for Israel, having a relationship like I have with these countries." Meanwhile, when it comes to preventing a nuclear-armed Iran, Netanyahu maintains that Israel, quote, will not stop and will not surrender. The stage is now set for continued tension between these longtime allies over how best to confront their common adversary.